This is a horror podcast, and as a result, it will have some horror in it. You may find that horror too disturbing. Don't worry, this ride is one you can get off at any time. Just press stop if it's getting to you. The Funrama at Old Man Jenkins' World of Fun and Death, that's not a ride you can get off, and honestly not one we would recommend you get on. PseudoPod, episode 955, December 27th, 2024. This week's stories, flash on the Borderlands 72 2024 Anthologies and Collections Showcase, featuring Summer Night, written and narrated by Robbie Banfitch, Chosen by TJ Price, narrated by Brent Lambert, The Encausting by Christy Nogle, narrated by Danny Daly, and The Noggle by Rob Costello, narrated by Justin Riestra, hosted by Alistair Stewart, audio by Chelsea Davis. Welcome to PseudoPod, the weekly horror podcast. This week's episode closes out 2024 for us, and is part of our 2024 Anthologies and Collections Showcase. Our signature quote for this is, "What once was pleasure, now is pain. For us all, in my heart, only shadows fall," by the Style Council. And our first story this week is by Robbie Banfitch.
Robbie Banfitch is an American filmmaker, writer, and musician. He graduated from School of Visual Arts in Manhattan and currently resides in Los Angeles. His debut feature, The Outwaters, was released theatrically in 2023, and his new film, Tinsman Road, is expected to premiere in 2025.
Summer Night was first published in the 2024 anthology Bury Your Gaze, an anthology of tragic queer horror. So focus on the stars. Only on the stars. It's a quiet night, but it won't be for long. And unfortunately, that's true.
Summer Night, written and narrated by Robbie Banfitch. The dark called out in the shape of them, dark coming out of the dark and toward him, and even the green of the trees seemed black through the sicular shine of the street lamp. His mind went deaf and his head went down like a beaten wolf, and the ground glistened beneath his blue shoes as the men approached and barked coldly at him. Their eyes floated the blackness, called somewhere beyond this horror into another, a hell long and worn and old, grey-choked air splashed with hot blood. And the women cried there long into the night, and dawn took their sound and drowned it with screeches of pigeons and blaring horns and walls of howling pain falling down and down and down upon them. He handed over his cigarettes and wallet and phone as told, and did so calmly, and knowing his death was upon him, and feeling stupid for being under this tree on this night at this hour. And miles of silver revolver stared him down, and time seemed distant and a separate thing altogether. Suspended, fly after fly after fly in a web, over and over again and into the trap, twitching and twisting and wrapping themselves in thickening cords and dying, one after the other, unending. And so he chose stillness, and even stillness choked him. How stupid to die. The revolver bashed the face of the other boy, the boy he was kissing moments before, kissing under the dark green leaves of the tree under the street lamp and its glow below the black, black, black of the sky. And for some reason he thought of stars and lips and his mother weeping, hunched above his wooden casket and losing her mind over her remaining years as she clawed to stay strong and have hope, even in the reflection of his spreading blood, though she would fail and her God would wither and die in her mind decades after its birth there, and his friends would eventually ignore her and feel pity and sadness as they moved on with their lives because they were stronger, and they would think of him from time to time as they shot whiskey at the bar or saw wolves in a film or a painting or a book. And photos of him would, over the course of years, conjure smiles rather than the deep sadness they knew so well. The robbing was done and the killing was to begin. He knew this because he had nothing left to give, and his pockets were flat and the men were empty and stupid and cold. Two voids before him holding shining weapons with more guts than they. He wished his pockets were deeper and that he'd never stopped dancing under the lights and that he'd kissed the boy under the spinning ball among his friends and strangers and kinder men. The whiskey had not yet soured on his tongue, and there was a hint of sweetness from the boy's lips, and he thought of the peach tree in his grandmother's yard, and how the sunlight grew it long after she'd passed and would grow it longer still, its branches forever reaching. He remembered the boy who left the bar weeks before in another city on another night and wondered where he was buried and if his body knew it was just a body, and if it was possible for a corpse to be lonely. He thought of all murdered boys as reduced to their final thoughts, flickering holes and halves hanging in the air over bloodied earth, perched in time, forever dying. Turn around, they said, and he knew this was the time it would all become what he thought it was, and real. He felt the bullet slam and shatter the back of his brain, and heard the roaring upswell of sound before the silence, which enveloped all of him and ended his story like it always had and always will for all men. He had felt this death in 100 dreams before, so he knew this story before it was ever written, and he would know it again until knowing went black and somewhere there was peace amid the stillness of his bones.
And photos of him would, over the course of years, conjure smiles rather than the deep sadness they knew so well. That line is a knife that is nothing but razor-sharp edges. It's a lie. The sadness never quite leaves when you lose someone, even if you lose them in less horrific ways than this. It's the truth, too. When I was a traumatized 18-year-old trying to deal with being faced by mortality way too early, I clung on to Henry Rollins' spoken word performances. Rollins was, and still is, big and clever and funny and furious and cool. I wanted to be all those things. I realize now, even then, I actually was. A big part of why I gravitated towards Rollins was that he had lost his best friend early too, through murder rather than terminal illness, but the pain was familiar, and seeing someone else experience it helped. What helped more years later was when I saw the man perform live, and he spoke at length about his friend. He was funny and kind and healed, and he hadn't noticed, because that's the final cut, that's the final edge on this knife. You hurt for so long you don't notice when it fades. The smiles do come, but the horror of not being there to see them, that never quite goes. And huddling around that guttering light in your final, too soon moments is something no one deserves. Our next story this week is Chosen by TJ Price, which was first published in the 2024 anthology Howls from the Scene of the Crime. TJ Price's corporeal being is currently located in Raleigh, North Carolina, with his handsome partner of many years, but his ghosts live in northeastern Connecticut, southern Maine, and North Brooklyn. He is the author of a novelette, The Disappearance of Tom Nero, and also has work in Nightmare Magazine, Pigeonholes, the No Sleep podcast, and various anthologies. He could be invoked at either tjpricewrites.com or via the Bluebird at EerieYore. Obviously, as usual, all the links will be in the show notes. Failing that, one can make a circle of chalk on the floor, stand in the center, and burn a photograph of a loved one until all that remains is ashes. Then, listen for a murmuring from within the walls. Leave your message after the sound of the scrap. Our narrator this week is the amazing Brent Lambert. Brent is a black, queer man who heavily believes in the transformative power of speculative fiction across media formats. He resides in San Diego, but spent a lot of time moving around as a military brat. His family roots are in the Cajun country of Louisiana. Currently, he manages the social media for Fire Literary Magazine, worked as senior programming coordinator for FireCon, and co-produced with Tor.com an anthology called Breathe Fire. He has work published with Fire, Anathema Magazine, Cotton Xenomorph, Baffling Magazine, and Beneath Ceaseless Skies. He can be found on Twitter at Brent C. Lambert, talking about the weird and the fantastic. Ask him his favourite members of the X-Men, and you'll get different answers every time. So remember, if you can, that this story is true.
Chosen by T.J. Price. Narrated by Brent Lambert. What we did, was it a crime if we couldn't remember it? There was guilt enough, shame too, enough to be particulate the way it hung in the air of the town. Every glance collided, skittering gazes, caroming off of one another. Was it you? Was it me? The golden child, we'd call him, even before he was chosen. Supernaturally favored, straight A's and on the football team too. Kind, generous, civil-minded. Too fine a soul to last too long in this world, a teacher was quoted on the news after it happened. After they found him. They weren't supposed to find him, but they did anyway. The way these things go. There was a choice to be made and we made it. It was one of those once-in-a-lifetime things. Opportunity, gold-flecked and radiant, knocking at the door. And that's all we know. We don't know how the price was paid, nor the manner in which the cost was exacted. Only that it was. Nonetheless, the body was found, so naturally we assumed that one of us had done it. Nobody confessed. Nobody had even an inkling of what happened that night. Memory ended at 8:30 for everyone in the town, a gaping abyss like a dreamless sleep until past sunrise the next day. The police searched for clues, for anything that would lead them to some kind of explanation, but there was nothing. For about 20 feet around the golden child's desecrated corpse, the field had been turned to a charry ash. They might as well have been looking for clues on the surface of the moon. Eventually, evidence starved, they acknowledged the circumstances and pled anomaly to the grieving parents. Extraordinary circumstances, said one. Deeply apologized, said another. Hearts and souls, said one more, hastily adding to the uniformed chorus. Flash bulbs and microphones intruded from out of town once the media got wind of the strange circumstances surrounding the body, even beyond the mystifying lack of memory in the burned circle. The body had been found with no identification, no wallet. As young as he was, he had yet to be entered into any kind of fingerprint database. And no one could remember his name. Not Dr. Hildare, the local doctor who delivered him. Not even his own mother and father. They searched and searched for his birth certificate, for school records, any documentation outside of memory that might deliver up his name. And yet there was nothing. He had existed, the golden child, their son, they insisted. They had the photographs to prove it. The golden child smiling. The golden child bathed in sunlight, teeth burnished white. The golden child, as though by reverse alchemy, turned back to dross and clay, turned nameless, the nameless boy. One night, while sitting at their silent dinner, the father comments how the word boy is only one letter away from the word body, and breaks down weeping, inconsolable, for hours. The mother's face wrinkles, shrivels, her eyes are dark pits. She grinds her molars, she tastes blood and does not know why. In the morning, the police find their bodies in the family car, parked idling in the closed garage, dead by poisoned air, just like falling asleep, they say. Between them, on the bench seat, is the urn containing their beloved son's ashes. It could have been them. The whispers are urgent, hiss from lips that purse, struggling to believe that what's been said is true. The myth catches like a wildfire. It was them. It was them. But too late. This is all yesterday's news. A brief item below the fold, the town and local section. Still unidentified murder victims' parents found dead. The town, after being invaded and scrutinized, shocked by the glaring light of national attention, receded into the shadows, licking its wounds. Bruised and battered, we crept back into our lives. The skin of our houses throbbed at night as if sunburned. That it was a crime remained certain. Whether or not we were criminals, all of us, or just one of us alone, remained a mystery. Many of us moved away, those that had the means to, determined to flee the invisible specter of guilt. Some have not returned. Those of us that remain go on with our lives. The school year is back in session. It is fall, and the trees shed leaves, molting and sibilant, over the heads of those who pass beneath. The seasons turn, and eventually the memory of the golden child dims, tarnishes. Had he been so golden after all? We convince ourselves that he must not have been, to have been chosen. And though we know a deal has been struck, somehow we do not know what the prize was at the end of all that cost. It must have been worth it, we murmur in our beds, tossed and turned with nightly disruptions from the invisible turbulence in our dreams. We wake in the mornings, assured that something must eventually go right, holding on to a rope as it frays, grasping at each slendering thread. Eventually, we stop looking. We empty our cheated hearts one morning in the spring, heaving a town-wide sigh of disappointment. Perhaps we will never know. Perhaps we will not know until after we too are gone, rendered nameless as well by the certain erosion of memory. To stave off the guilt, we forget. Someone from out of town, from away, purchases the plot of land where the golden child's body was found, raises it, builds a house. We forget. The cankers of guilt heal. We stop looking for the prize. But the children, the children since then have all been so beautiful. All the lucky ones born after the grievous death of the golden child. How brightly they smile. Yet, Lord, how dark their eyes are. So full of misgivings. So full of doubts. It is almost as if they know something that we cannot.
Still unidentified victims' parents found dead. That's the show. Right there. That single line is a perfect fractal diamond of horror. It makes sense until it doesn't. It looks plausible, like a real sentence, but it's like biting into a sandwich and tasting water. It's like listening to music that you can smell. Something massive approaching and breaking the world as it goes, but not quite letting us understand what it is. But then the diamond turns again, and you see that all the supernatural elements are doing is magnifying the voice that whispers in every small town, looking for someone to hate. Someone who's different, and in a town like this, too nice, too talented, and too successful all count as different too. A sacrifice, not for a boon, but for the status quo. One just barbed enough to not let its exit wound heal. One every kid who follows knows, even if they can't say why or how. The rage of our first story, the powerlessness, combined with the arc of history, heading not towards justice but towards reckoning. Remarkable work on both stories, thanks to everyone. And next is The Encausting by Christy Nogle. The Encausting was first published in Seaside Gothic and reprinted in the 2024 collection One Eye Opened in That Other Place. Christy Nogle's short stories have appeared in PseudoPod, Lady Churchill's Rosebud Wristlet, and Night Script 3, and are forthcoming from Black Dandy and The Arcanist. Christy teaches college writing and lives in Boise, Idaho, with her partner Jim and their dogs and cats. Your narrator this week is Danny Daly. Danny is a jack of many trades and a master of none, but seeing as she loves the rogue life, that's just fine with her. You can hear stories she's narrated on all 4 original Escape Artist podcasts, Starship Sofa, Glittership, and Asimov's science fiction podcast. And you can contact her on Twitter at Danuli_Danny if you'd like her to read for you. And you should. Now, rise and shine. Time to be okay. Ignore the heat. Ignore the sensation. You're fine. It's the truth. You're fine.
The Encausting by Christy Nogle. Narrated by Danny Daly. I came to the seaside to find myself, to finally become the person I was meant to be. I work mornings in a stuffy little gift shop just off the boardwalk, and nights in the Crafters Mall. It's scary to clean in there at night, but it feels good to be scared. I feel alive, like I just woke up. Appetite's better than ever. The food court pumps out Thai food, and fish and chips, and thin crust pizza. Indian food, Mexican, everything fresh and hot. There's a gelato stall, a stall that sells nothing but macarons. I'd never eaten a macaron before I came here. Not to mention tiramisu, sushi, crab meat. I'm making friends. Not at the gift shop, but at the mall. They'll eat with me if I'm not too hidden away in a book. They'll persuade me to go to a bar, and we'll complain about our lives. It's fun, I guess. The Jeep's still running, still getting me through the tourist traffic. The cars make last-second turns and brake hard. Pedestrians cross like ducks in tie-dye, staring at their phones in the middle of the road. But days off are what I live for. I lie on a blanket on the beach, reading trashy used paperbacks, and dozing in and out. I walk for hours, pick up my things on the way back. I bought maroon sheets, and there are soapy flakes on them in the mornings. Like when you peel a sunburn, only I haven't gotten a sunburn. One morning, Sam, the guy from the fish and chip stall, is in my bed with a sour look on his face. "What is all this?" he says. "Sunburn," I say, but he must see it can't be. Work soon, so I rush to the shower. I step out and begin drying, but the wax balls up, ropes up, sticks to the towel. I sigh, start a hot bath, dig under the sink for salt scrub and a loofah. Sam comes to kiss me goodbye, and on impulse, I throw off my towel and back him into the bedroom. While it's going on, I feel the wax just flowing out of me. Sam doesn't ask, but he sees. He feels it on him. He won't be back here. The Crafters Mall ought to have been torn down long ago, but things seem to get left alone out here. I stack the chairs and wash the main hall floor and do the first floor bathrooms, which are a nightmare. Wind whistles through unseen cracks. The floor feels unsteady, upstairs and down. I work fast and come out into a dark, empty street, hoping the Jeep will start. I have too much fear, and I think about what it might signify. I always expect something to jump out at me. But what? Am I guilty for being so selfish, coming out here? Expecting punishment? It's a rush to get something to eat and some sleep, shower, and find something decent to wear to the gift shop. It's exhausting to watch the shoppers put the little glass baubles back in place. It's exhausting to smile for 4 or 5 hours, and then the day feels ruined after that. If I have the morning off, I sleep in, and when I wake, all of my skin is tight and greasy. It creases and flakes. When I wrench myself into a sitting position, the surface of it breaks off my hips and knees. I take a piece of it in my fingers. The skin where it's broken off is red and mottled. My pores are clogged too. I get a magnifying mirror, hoping I can push out the plugs before I break out even more. I'm crying while I cake on my foundation. It's getting worse, coming faster. I learn to dissolve the wax in olive oil and scrape it off, as the Greek athletes used to do. They'd squeegee the oil off their bodies, and Old ladies would use it, because it was full of their youth and virility. One morning, it's thick enough to peel. The little vellus hairs on my jaw come off with a searing flash of pain, and my scalp is held in a tight wax cap. I pour olive oil on it and scrub like I'm shampooing, eye on the clock because I'm supposed to be at work. The oil and wax on my scalp makes such a pulpy mess, I cry. I shampoo with the oil until I have no more oil. I follow up with dandruff shampoo. Rinse. Repeat. I make it to work with wet hair, but the next day I have to quit the gift shop. It's too hard to get presentable. I keep cleaning for a while after that, holding my face as far back as I can in my sweatshirt hood. The wax is building up in the daytime now, and the people all avoid me. Or I avoid them. I can't say which. I can't say for sure that I raise my eyes to theirs, ever. It takes a week to finally pry away from the Crafters Mall. After they stop calling, I feel better again for a time. 3 or 4 times a day I drive to the little apartment. I remove the greatest part of the wax, drive back out to the beach, and then I start bringing my bottle of oil and spatula to the beach. You can de-wax just as well in a bathroom stall. And then I stop driving home to sleep. And then I run out of oil. The Jeep was ticketed sometime. It was towed sometime later while I wasn't watching. I'm not watching anything anymore. The wax has filled in around my eyes. It doesn't hurt. It feels safe, like a wrapping. It feels right. I want to stop making it crack, and so I must be still. I lie on my blanket and let be what will be.
You can take more than you think you can. You are tougher, braver, kinder, and stronger than you know. So am I. So are we all. We are infinitely more capable of doing the hard things than we think we are, because we are so terrified of the hard things that they live rent-free in our heads long before they actually happen. That means that when they do finally get here, it's almost a relief. But it also means that while we can deal with them, the small things too often take us out. Wax falling off, piece by piece. Encaustic art mixes pigments with hot wax, and that process, so beautifully described here, can be interpreted in 2 ways, both locked on that final scene. The first is that this is a process of destruction, of being overwhelmed. What doesn't get frayed off by trauma, we pick off, in an attempt to convince ourselves that we're okay, when we could not be further from that. But I prefer the other way of looking at it. That the final scene here is the first scene in what happens next. The wax consumes you, the grief consumes you, and eventually, even if just for a while, the grief always consumes you, but it never destroys you. Pigment marks you, but it doesn't mark you everywhere. The wax fades. You get back up in a different shape, but you always get back up. You won't want to. And that's the horror. But you will. And that's the hope. Our final story this week is The Noggle by Rob Costello. Rob, he/him, writes contemporary and dark fiction with a queer bent for and about young people. He is the contributing editor of We Mostly Come Out at Night, 15 Queer Tales of Monsters, Angels and Other Creatures, and author of the story collection The Dancing Bears, Queer Fables for the End Times. His debut novel, An Ugly World for Beautiful Boys, is forthcoming from Lathe Press in 2025. His stories have appeared in The Dark, the No Sleep podcast, the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, Hunger Mountain, Stone Canoe, Narrative, and Rural Voices. 15 authors challenge assumptions about small-town America. An alumnus of the Malay Colony of the Arts, he holds an MFA in writing from the Vermont College of Fine Arts and has served on the faculty of the Highlights Foundation since 2014. He is co-founder, along with Lisa Klein Ransom, Joe Knowles, and Jennifer Richard Jacobson, of the Revise and Shine writing community, and he lives in upstate New York with his husband and their four-legged overlords. Learn more at cloudbusterpress.com and reviseandshine.com. You can also find Rob on Instagram and TikTok at cloudbusterpress. The novel was first published in the 2024 collection The Dancing Bears, Queer Fables for the End Times. The novel is one of 3 original tales in the collection. It will also appear in the forthcoming More Fae anthology edited by Steve Berman for Lathe Press. Your narrator for this story is Justin Riestra. Justin works in a critical care unit and writes gross stories. He's currently working to get a website up. So make your deal. Look the truth square in the eyes. Because it's time.
The Noggle by Rob Costello. Narrated by Justin Riestra. I looked up from my book that night to find the Noggle peering down at me through my bedroom window. His black horse's nostrils exhaling whirls of blue fog into the frigid air. I kicked away my blankets, sat up on my heels, pressed my fingertips to the glass as if to reach through it to caress his muzzle. In the moon glow, I caught sight of my own reflection. The snowlight had turned my skin pale blue, and for a moment I thought I must be staring at my own ghost. But no, not yet. Though I knew that's why he'd finally come for me, that reaper of the deep I'd longed for on so many terrible nights without you. You see, baby, after you were gone, I researched him for months in all the books you left behind. I learned what I must do when he came for me. I tried all the recommended ways to call him, the dream chants, the whispers into the wind, the small creatures sacrificed on the riverbank. But for so many nights he disappointed me until I'd almost lost hope that the old tired magic would even work anymore. But here he was, finally. And instead of feeling bitter that he'd made me wait for so long, the reflected me who gazed out with wonder at the water horse come to carry me to the bottom of the cold dead river merely looked relieved to finally be going. And what of the Noggle himself? His coat was the inky black of drowning in deep water. Though the night was calm, a phantom gale lashed his mane like seaweed caught in an angry riptide. The muscles of his neck and flanks rippled with raw power, yet his eyes were not fearsome at all, merely glazed and cloudy, like that of a dead thing washed up on a desolate shore. He neighed a thunderous greeting to me, and the walls of the trailer quivered like a storm-lashed hull. Then he swept his broad horse's head in an invitation, and my aching for you carried me out of my bed and into the living room, where I was bathed in the blue light from the television. Mama laid sprawled like a crime scene in her recliner, her hand still glued to the rim of an empty china teacup that hadn't seen tea since before Daddy died. She'd tried to talk sense into me many times after you were gone. She grew concerned over my obsession. She said, "Boy, let the dead bury their dead." And she said, "My God, don't end up like me." But these were just empty words. We both knew we mourned our ghosts with our whole bodies and souls. It was in our blood. And I could no more stop burning on the inside for you than she might will herself sober. Haunted was what we become. It was then that I noticed that the left side of her robe had come undone, exposing a crumpled wad of brown bag breast, and so I moved to cover it with an Afghan, but the Noggle battered its muzzle impatiently against the trailer, pitching it into such a violent shimmy that I had to leave Mama to her indecency and hurry outside. The night air struck me breathless. A rime of frost crusted the trailer's metal walls, which glinted like stardust in the moonlight. A breeze rattled the silver bones of the trees, carrying with it the stench of the rotting river bottom. The Noggle strode toward me, his eyes fixed upon me, luring me toward him, turning my naked skin to goose flesh. He neighed again, and the sound of it sent an electric pulse coursing through my body. He scratched at the frozen ground with a backward-turned hoof, and then bowed his head in fealty and knelt before me. I approached him slowly, wincing as icy pebbles bit into the soles of my bare feet, yet the Noggle remained still, perhaps fearing I would bolt at any sudden movement. But although he was huge and menacing, mightier than I could have imagined, I was not afraid. Why should I be? The only thing I had left to lose was the very thing I'd called him here to take from me. When I finally bent forward to whisper my request into his ear, the whole world hushed, as if leaning in to eavesdrop. "I am Samuel Amon Williams," I said, my voice as calm and fearless as all the books had instructed it to be. "I give you my one true name of my own free will, and now you must do for me what you've come here to do. Take me to him. Take me to the boy I love. Take me to the bottom of that cold, dead river, so that we may be together again." But baby, when I twisted my fingers into the Noggle's icy mane to mount him, he just melted into nothing in my grasp. His body vanished, gone. All I was left holding onto in that barren moonlight was your soft black peacoat. I wear it sometimes now when I'm alone. It helps me think of you as you once were. It reminds me of what we had back then. How beautiful you were, how tender with me, how strong. Of course, I can't let anyone see that I have it. How could I explain? I read the police report, the witness statements, how you were wearing it when those animals chased you onto the bridge screaming faggot and spook and devil lover. How they cornered you, kicked you, and beat you. Sliced your poor naked throat and then hurled your battered body into the cold, dead river. But it doesn't even smell of your blood anymore. Not of wet or rot, or the stink of the river bottom. Now it smells only of you. Of your incense, of your sweat, of your dollar store shampoo. It smells of your smile. Sometimes I sleep with it draped over the top of me. And sometimes late at night I carry it in my backpack, down to the riverbank. Once there, I lovingly unfold it from the bag, and then I strip naked, slip it over my bare shoulders, and stride boldly into that bitter black water. The slime and silt at the bottom suck at my toes. The wind whips the waves into a frenzy, and moonlight cascades down from the inky sky, catching it in the Noggle's mane like stardust as he emerges from the deeper water to greet me. Then he lets me clamber onto his mighty back. And with a thunderous bray that shatters the night, together we ride. Ride. Ride.
Rob told us that this story is inspired by a mythical and lethal water horse from the folklore of Orkney in the Shetland Islands. He said the piece is about coping with grief and how sometimes the only way to survive grief is by surrendering to it, and he's not wrong. For me, this and the previous story exist in conversation with one another. The notes I made for this were grief as a friend, mourning as kindness, or feeding. All of that can be true, and all of that can be true at once. Late last month was the 27th anniversary of my best friend's death. For years, the survivors gathered on the anniversary to incompetently but enthusiastically ravel our grief away, to rip the wound open so we could maybe heal better next time. He was no age at all, and he died, and that's an injustice. that the first story here seethes with, and it's an injustice that I see reflected all the way through them. But that first story and the line I quoted from it is something close to what this time of year always feels like for me. The horror of his loss tempered by the love for his presence. Like Rollins, I healed and didn't notice. In fact, I didn't notice for a long time. He's not forgotten, and he never will be, but the encaustic nature of his loss is more behind me than ahead, and I know that that's a luxury, and I know that that's a kindness. I know I'm grateful for it, and I know it's not enough, but it's what we have, and the key to this story, for me, is the tacit acknowledgement of that. Of the Noggle representing grief as a friend, acknowledging nothing it can do is enough, but that it can do something. Mourning is an act of memory, but it is also an act of kindness. Grief is a hunger that needs to be fed, but it can never be fed too much. Ride with your grief, if you can. I will too. What a remarkable set of stories. Thanks so much to everyone involved in putting these together. Now, 2025 is just around the corner, and with it, Escape Artist's 20th anniversary. To prepare for 20 more years, we are running an end-of-year donation drive, and several of our most generous supporters have committed to matching every gift 1-to-1 between now and January 1st. That means if you donate $5, it will become a $10 donation. $25 becomes $50, and $42 becomes twice the meaning of life, the universe, and everything to us. If you make a one-time gift, it will go twice as far today, but if you subscribe, you will have twice the impact for the rest of the year. Monthly donations ensure we can plan ahead with a reliable income, which means we can publish more original stories, devote more time to editorial excellence, and plan for the future. And because Escape Artists is a US 501c3 non-profit, your donation may be tax deductible, depending, of course, on your own tax circumstances. EA can also accept gifts from donor-advised funds, family foundations, employer-matching gift programs, and lots more. So whether you have been a member of Escape Artists community since 2005 or just started following us, welcome. We are so glad to have you here, and now is the perfect time to start supporting us, because your gift will have twice the impact. Visit escapeartists.net/support for all our support options, from Patreon and PayPal to Ko-fi and more. Or if you have a question, contact donations@escapeartists.net. Thank you for supporting our mission to bring free and accessible speculative audio fiction to a global audience. We could not do it without you. PseudoPod is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 non-profit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Download and listen to the episode on any device you like, but please don't change it, and please don't sell it. Theme music is by permission of Anders Manga. We will see you next week. And next year, wow, with The Old Lady by Eleanor Scott, audio produced by Chelsea, narrated by Kat, and hosted by me. Until then, PseudoPod wants you to remember, evil's boring, right? I kind of believe in the banality and mundaneness of evil. Evil is just selfish impulses, which at the end of the day are really easy to understand. It's easy to understand why people do bad things. It's like, yeah, okay, you're selfish and scared and cruel, I get it. Being good is complex and beautiful and hard. Be good. We will too. And we'll see you next year.
An arm appeared from nowhere on the shape, seemingly projected like the pseudopod of a protozoan.
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.